The tension in the Brown household was palpable that evening, like electricity charging the air before a storm. The cameras had long stopped being strangers, but tonight, under their relentless gaze, every glance, every word, and every pause carried the weight of scrutiny. Kody Brown leaned back in his chair, a glass of water trembling slightly in his hand. Not from nerves, he insisted, but from the anticipation of what was to come. Robyn, sitting across from him at the polished dining table, sensed it immediately. There was a flicker in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Something dangerous, something unfiltered. "Kody?" she said cautiously, choosing her words as though she were diffusing a bomb. "What are you even thinking?" He smirked, a thin, hard smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been thinking about changes," he said, letting the word hang between them like smoke. Robyn's stomach dropped. She'd lived through decades of Kody's blunt honesty, but there were lines he rarely crossed in front of the cameras, and this felt like he was walking right over them. "You mean," she started, but he didn't answer. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and the full force of his declaration hit her like a punch. "I want a younger, hotter trophy wife," he said, his voice calm but lethal in its finality. The words were like ice water. Robyn froze, blinking once, twice, trying to process the humiliation, the betrayal, and the absurdity all at once. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as if even the furniture were recoiling from the statement. The cameras continued to roll. Every gasp, every twitch of her hand would be captured for the audience at home. Millions of strangers who would soon witness her shame. Robyn clenched her fists under the table. She could feel the heat rising in her face, the sting of tears that she refused to let fall. Kody, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent to her reaction, continued. "I've been thinking about what we have, what I want, and it's just time for a change." Robyn's mind raced. Time for a change? The words echoed in her head, turning every shared memory, every promise into ash. Her years of dedication, her sacrifices, every late night soothing sick children or managing the house while Kody pursued his ventures. Did none of that matter? "Change?" she said finally, her voice trembling but sharp. "You mean, replace me?" Kody shrugged, as if it were an inevitable truth of life. "Not replace. Expand. You understand me, Robyn? You know me." But Robyn didn't feel understood. She felt exposed, mocked, humiliated before not only Kody, but the cameras and the world. Her mind spun with fury and disbelief. And somewhere deep inside, a fire ignited, a quiet, simmering determination. She would not go quietly. She would not be reduced to a punchline in her husband's twisted narrative. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Words were exchanged, sharp and clipped, but no resolution came. Kody retreated to his private quarters, leaving Robyn alone in the living room, staring at the polished floor as if it could answer her questions. The cameras captured it all, but she barely noticed them. Her focus was inward, plotting, planning, and steeling herself for the storm that had just begun. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. The next morning, the house felt unusually quiet. The usual hum of activity, children running down the hallway, the clatter of breakfast dishes, the low murmur of conversation, was missing. Robyn sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was someone she barely recognized, eyes rimmed with fatigue and hurt, shoulders tense, lips pressed into a line of forced composure. The memory of Kody's words from last night burned fresh in her mind. "I want a younger, hotter trophy wife." She shook her head, trying to dismiss it as a cruel joke, but the sharpness in his tone and the intensity of his gaze told her it was anything but. Across the house, Kody moved with a calm that bordered on arrogance. He had made his point, and now he awaited the fallout, almost curious about how it would unfold. He didn't understand, or perhaps didn't care, that the chaos he had sown in Robyn's heart was about to ripple through the entire family. The first to notice the tension was Meri, Robyn's youngest stepdaughter. She had been sitting quietly at the breakfast table, pretending to scroll through her phone, but her sharp eyes caught the rigid posture of her mother. "Mom?" Meri asked cautiously. "Are you okay?" Robyn forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." But Mariah wasn't convinced. She had seen the way Kody could hurt people with words before, and she knew this was worse. As the day progressed, wordlessly, the household split into two camps. Some of the older children tried to maintain normalcy, hoping the cameras wouldn't pick up the growing tension. Others, more perceptive, hovered around Robyn, sensing her growing isolation and her quiet, burning anger. Meanwhile, Kody seemed to glide through the day unaffected. He met with the crew, discussed filming schedules, and even cracked a joke or two. But every laugh sounded hollow to Robyn. Every movement he made reminded her that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. By mid-afternoon, Robyn had made a decision. She could not allow this humiliation to go unanswered. Not for herself, not for her children, and not for the family she had tried so hard to keep together. She called a private meeting with the other wives, a carefully orchestrated gathering that would change the trajectory of the season, and possibly the family itself. Polygamy, she reminded herself, was always complicated, but betrayal, as Kody had so bluntly demonstrated, could not be ignored. "Ladies," Robyn began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, "we need to talk about what happened last night." The room fell silent. Each wife exchanged nervous glances. They had sensed tension but had never witnessed it escalate this far before. "I can't stay silent while Kody says things like that," Robyn continued. "I won't, and I need you all to understand. This isn't just about me. It affects all of us." The conversation that followed was tense, emotional, and at times, explosive. Alliances were tested, loyalties questioned, and long-buried grievances resurfaced. By the time it ended, it was clear the Brown family was no longer just a TV show. It was a battlefield. And at the center of it, Robyn realized something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. She might be the only one with the courage to confront Kody, even if it meant everything she had worked for would come crashing down around her. Kody sat alone in his study, flipping through his phone absent-mindedly. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, but it did nothing to soften the tension in his jaw. In his mind, he was perfectly justified. He had been honest, brutally honest, but honesty in his view was always preferable to pretending. Still, even he could feel the tremor of unease that ran through the house. The quiet that greeted him in the morning was not peace. It was a warning. He remembered the way Robyn had looked at him last night, a mixture of shock, hurt, and something darker, something that hinted at confrontation. "I told her the truth," he muttered to himself. "She doesn't have to like it." But deep down, Kody sensed the storm he had unleashed. Polygamy had always been a delicate balancing act, a series of negotiations between feelings, loyalties, and ambitions. And now, he realized, he had upset that balance in a way he couldn't easily fix. Meanwhile, Robyn wasn't waiting. After her meeting with the other wives, she had retreated to her room, plotting the next steps. She knew Kody thrived on control, on shaping narratives, and she refused to allow herself, or the family, to be manipulated. "He can't humiliate me and expect me to stay quiet," she thought. Not this time. Her strategy was simple but risky. Confront Kody directly, in front of the cameras, and force him to face the consequences of his words. It was a gamble, but if she didn't take it, she knew she would regret it forever. Later that evening, the family gathered for dinner, a scene designed to appear ordinary to the cameras. The clatter of silverware and a hum of polite conversation masked the tension that simmered just below the surface. Robyn sat rigidly, her eyes fixed on Kody, who seemed blissfully unaware, or intentionally oblivious, to her calculated stare. "Kody," she began, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "We need to talk?" The room went silent. The other wives exchanged nervous glances. Kody's smirk faltered slightly, but he masked it quickly. "What about?" he asked casually, though the subtle tension in his tone betrayed him. "About what you said," Robyn replied, each word deliberate. "About wanting a younger, hotter trophy wife." Kody's fork paused midair. He could feel the eyes of the crew on him, the wives watching, and for the first time that day, he realized that the words he had thoughtlessly thrown out had consequences far beyond his control. "You don't understand," he said, trying to regain his composure. I was just being honest. It's nothing personal." Robyn leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Nothing personal? You humiliated me in front of everyone. Our children, our friends, the cameras. You made me feel like I'm disposable. And do you know what that does to a person?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the youngest children sensed the tension, the unspoken rift between their parents. "You think this is easy for me?" Kody said finally, his voice rising, but now tinged with defensiveness instead of certainty. "I have needs, desires." "Desires!" Robyn interrupted sharply. "Desires do not give you the right to trample on someone you supposedly love." A silence fell, broken only by the soft whir of the cameras. For the first time, Kody realized that his words were not going to be brushed aside. This confrontation would not be scripted, controlled, or edited to his favor, and that, perhaps, was exactly what Robyn intended. The morning after the dinner confrontation, the Brown household was divided like a battlefield. The other wives, Meri, Janelle, Christine, and even Robyn's closest confidants, were weighing their loyalties. Each had their own history with Kody, their own grievances, and their own survival strategies. Meri was the first to break the silence. Sitting across from Robyn at the kitchen table, she stirred her coffee slowly, choosing each word with care. "You know, Robyn," Meri began, her voice low, "he does this sometimes, pushes the boundaries, says things he shouldn't, but you can't let it destroy you. You have to pick your battles." Robyn's hands tightened around her mug. "Pick my battles? Meri, he humiliated me. He didn't just step over a line, he bulldozed it. And he thinks it's acceptable because he said it out loud." Meri hesitated. "I get it. I really do. But if you confront him too harshly, the cameras, the drama, it could backfire." Robyn shook her head. "I'm done worrying about cameras. This isn't about reality TV anymore. This is about my dignity, my children, and the truth." Meanwhile, Janelle and Christine exchanged glances in the hallway. They had been listening quietly, weighing whether to intervene or remain neutral. Loyalty to Kody had always been complicated, especially with decades of shared history, but even they could sense the line had been crossed. Christine whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe it's time he sees what it's like to be on the receiving end." The tension came to a head when Kody attempted to convene a family meeting later that evening. He had expected compliance, an obedient acknowledgement of his authority. Instead, he was met with quiet defiance. Robyn stood first. "No, Kody, not this time. You're not going to dictate what's acceptable anymore. You need to understand that your words have consequences." The other wives shuffled uncomfortably, but Meri gave a subtle nod to Robyn, signaling her quiet support. Janelle and Christine followed suit. Kody's face hardened. "I don't need consequences. I'm being honest with you all. That's all." "Honesty doesn't give you permission to humiliate," Robyn shot back. "We've all lived in this family under your rules for years. But this crosses every line. And the children are watching. They see what you do and you think it's acceptable?" The room was electric. Even the crew, trained to remain invisible, felt the palpable tension. Cameras rolled silently, capturing every subtle gesture, every micro-expression. Kody's voice finally broke the charged silence. "So what? You're all gonna gang up on me? Turn against me?" Robyn met his gaze without flinching. "No, we're not ganging up on you. We're standing up for ourselves, for the truth, and for this family. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time you learn why your actions matter." For the first time, Kody seemed off balance. He had underestimated Robyn, underestimated the quiet strength that had been building under the surface for years. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room, this family, this carefully orchestrated reality show, was no longer just a spectacle. It was a battleground. By the time evening rolled around, the Brown household had become a pressure cooker. The air felt heavy, saturated with unspoken grievances, anger, and fear. Every glance between Kody and Robyn carried a silent accusation. Every sigh from the other wives hinted at long-buried resentment. Kody, unaware of the full extent of the storm he had unleashed, attempted to start a family activity. A casual dinner and game night, a facade of normalcy he had relied on countless times before. But it was clear from the first second that nothing would feel normal tonight. Robyn sat at the table, her back straighter than usual, her eyes fixed on Kody like a hawk ready to strike. The other wives fidgeted uneasily, sensing the inevitable confrontation. "Okay, everyone," Kody said brightly, forcing cheer into his tone. "Let's just relax tonight. No drama, no tension." Robyn's voice cut through his forced levity. "No, Kody, there will be drama because you made it that way." The room froze. The younger children glanced at each other, sensing the seriousness in their mother's tone. Kody's smile faltered. "Robyn, come on. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" Robyn's voice sharpened, rising slightly. "You humiliated me. You openly declared you want a younger, hotter wife right here in front of the cameras, in front of our children. That's not a joke, Kody. That's cruelty." The other wives exchanged uneasy glances. Christine spoke up cautiously. "Robyn's right. You can't just say things like that and expect it to disappear. There are consequences." Kody's defenses flared. "Consequences? What are you talking about? I'm being honest. Isn't honesty what this family is supposed to value?" Janelle leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "Honesty isn't permission to hurt people. There's a difference, Kody, and it's time you learned that." Even Meri, who often tried to mediate, now added her voice to the chorus. "We've all lived under this system, under your rules, but that doesn't mean we have to accept humiliation. Not anymore." The weight of their collective voices struck Kody like a thunderclap. For years, he had been the center, the authority, the decision-maker. And yet, tonight, he faced a truth he had long ignored. The people around him, those he claimed to love, were no longer willing to let him dictate the narrative. Robyn stood, her hands trembling slightly, though her resolve was unshakable. "I am not your trophy, Kody. I am not disposable. And if you think your desires give you the right to belittle me, you are gravely mistaken." The room was silent, except for the hum of the cameras, capturing every word, every expression, every heartbeat. The children looked on, some with confusion, some with dawning understanding that the family they knew was fracturing before their eyes. For the first time, Kody felt the weight of his own actions reflected back at him, unfiltered and impossible to control. The ego that had always shielded him from consequence wavered, and in its place, a flicker of fear appeared. Fear that the family he had built might no longer be his to command. And as Robyn's words hung in the air, steady, unwavering, one truth became undeniable: the Brown family would never be the same. The days following the confrontation were strained, heavy with unspoken resentment and fragile civility. The Brown household, usually bustling with orchestrated energy, had descended into a tense quiet. Even the children seemed to tiptoe around their parents, sensing the invisible fault lines threatening to split the family apart. Robyn moved through the house with careful purpose, reclaiming spaces that Kody had long dominated, not with rage, but with quiet authority. Each glance she cast, each subtle assertion of presence, reminded Kody that her dignity was not negotiable. Kody, for his part, struggled with the reality he had created. The bravado that had always shielded him from criticism was failing. He couldn't manipulate cameras, charm the wives, or rely on habit to smooth over the fractures he'd caused. The ripple effects of his words were everywhere. Meri confronted him one morning in the living room, her tone measured but sharp. "Kody, this isn't about you anymore. You pushed too far, and now you have to deal with the fallout. The family isn't just yours to control." Kody ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into his features. "I don't know how to fix this. I thought being honest was enough." Janelle, who had been silently observing, added, "Honesty isn't the same as respect. You've confused the two for years, and now it's hitting you in ways you weren't prepared for." Robyn entered the room, her eyes locking with Kody's. "You need to understand something, Kody. This isn't about punishment. This is about accountability. You can no longer dismiss our feelings or our voices. We exist, all of us, and we deserve to be treated as equals, not as props in your life story." The words cut deep, reverberating through Kody in a way he wasn't used to. For the first time, he saw the wives not as extensions of himself, but as individuals, strong, resolute, unwilling to be silenced. That evening, a family meeting was called. this time with the children present. The tension in the room was almost tangible, every eye on Kody, waiting for his response. Robyn spoke first, carefully, deliberately. "We need to rebuild trust, and that starts with you acknowledging that your actions have consequences and that your words can hurt more than you realize." Kody swallowed hard, the weight of reality pressing down. I didn't mean to hurt you," he admitted, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. I thought I could just say what I wanted, and it wouldn't change anything. I was wrong." The wives exchanged cautious glances. This admission, though small, was a crack in the wall of arrogance that had long shielded Kody from accountability. Christine, who had often been quiet, finally spoke. "It's a start, but words alone aren't enough. Actions matter. You need to show us, through your behavior, that you respect us, our feelings, and our family." The children, watching silently, began to sense the shift as well. They saw that authority could be questioned, that even a patriarch could be held accountable, and that respect was not optional. It was demanded. As the meeting ended, Robyn felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges, but for the first time in a long while, the family had a chance to confront the fractures that had long been ignored. And in the quiet aftermath, Kody was left to grapple with the reality he had created. A family no longer bound by fear or habit, but by the hard-earned respect that could no longer be taken for granted. The days that followed were quiet, but the silence was not peace. It was the careful hush of a family recalibrating itself. The Brown household moved with deliberate caution, each member testing the boundaries that had been violently shaken the week before. Kody, for the first time, began to reflect, not on his desires or ego, but on the consequences of his actions. He observed the wives and children, noting their subtle changes, the way Robyn carried herself with renewed confidence, the careful glances exchanged between Meri and Janelle, the quiet awareness in the eyes of the children. He tried small gestures at first, a word of acknowledgement here, a shared responsibility there. Nothing dramatic. He had learned that apologies without action meant little. Robyn watched him warily, unsure whether his attempts were genuine or performative. "Kody," she said one afternoon while organizing the kitchen with Meri and Christine, "words are easy. Respect is what you have to prove every day, not just for show." Kody nodded, swallowing past the sting of humiliation he had finally begun to feel. "I know," he admitted. I've been selfish. I need to do better." Christine, always candid, offered a rare smile. "It's a start, just make sure it's consistent. Actions matter more than declarations." Meanwhile, the family began to establish new norms. The children were encouraged to voice their feelings openly. The wives began to support each other in ways they hadn't before, forming a subtle alliance that strengthened the household while reminding Kody that control was no longer unilateral. Despite the progress, tension lingered. Kody's ego still flared at times, reminding him that the path to redemption would not be easy. There were small arguments, moments of frustration, and tests of patience, but each time the family pressed forward, refusing to allow regression to old patterns. One evening, Robyn and Kody sat alone in the living room. The cameras were rolling, but Robyn ignored them, focusing entirely on him. "Kody," she began softly, "I want to believe that you can change, that we can move past this. But I need to know, are you willing to put in the work? Not just say the words, but live them?" Kody took a deep breath. "Yes, I don't want to hurt this family or you anymore. I can't undo the past, but I can try to make the future better. I will." Robyn studied him carefully, weighing sincerity against the history of missteps. Finally, she nodded. "Then show me. Show all of us." The night settled into a cautious peace. It was not perfect, and it would never erase the humiliation or the pain, but it marked the beginning of a reckoning, a rebuilding process that would test every member of the Brown family in the months to come. For Kody, the lesson was clear. Honesty without empathy was dangerous. Desire without respect was destructive. And leadership without accountability was meaningless. For Robyn, Meri, Janelle, and Christine, the lesson was equally clear. Strength came not only from loyalty but from courage, from speaking up, and from demanding respect, even when it challenged the status quo. And for the children, the lesson was one that would shape them for life. Families could be complicated, people could fail, but integrity, respect, and love were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The cameras rolled on, capturing every moment. But for once, the story wasn't about spectacle. It was about survival, resilience, and the slow, painstaking reconstruction of a family that had been shaken to its core. Weeks passed, but the echoes of Kody's words and the confrontation with Robyn lingered like shadows in every corner of the Brown household. The cameras continued to roll, capturing family life that was now more fragile, more cautious, and yet more authentic than ever before. Robyn moved through the days with renewed confidence. She no longer allowed herself to shrink in Kody's presence. Every decision, every conversation, every glance carried a quiet authority that had been absent before. Her children, inspired by her strength, began to express themselves more openly, asking questions, asserting boundaries, and slowly learning that respect was something that could and should be demanded. Meanwhile, Kody faced a different battle. Outside the household, rumors began to swirl. Social media was ablaze with clips of the confrontation, commentary about his behavior, and public scrutiny that even the cameras could not contain. The perception of him as a patriarch was being challenged not just within his family, but in the court of public opinion. At first, Kody reacted defensively. He posted carefully curated statements, interviews full of practiced charm, but deep down, he realized that his actions had consequences he could no longer control. For the first time in years, he had to consider how his behavior impacted not only the people he loved, but the wider world watching him. Meri, Janelle, and Christine, meanwhile, found themselves navigating a delicate balance between loyalty to Kody and solidarity with Robyn. They began to speak more openly about their own grievances, sharing moments of frustration that had long been suppressed. The alliance between the wives, once tenuous and fractured, strengthened in subtle, powerful ways. One evening, Robyn gathered the family for a quiet conversation away from the cameras. "We can't pretend everything is perfect," she said gently, "but we can decide how we respond. We can choose honesty, accountability, and respect. Or we can continue letting fear and humiliation rule our lives." Kody listened, absorbing the words. His ego bristled, but he also felt the sting of truth. For the first time, he recognized that leadership was not about commanding fear. It was about earning trust. The children, some shy, some bold, voiced their own perspectives. They spoke of fairness, of wanting a household where no one's feelings were dismissed, and of learning from mistakes rather than hiding them. The room was filled with raw honesty, the kind that could not be scripted or manipulated. By the end of the night, a fragile understanding began to form. Kody, humbled but not broken, acknowledged his missteps and vowed to act differently. The wives, resolute yet cautious, reaffirmed their boundaries while expressing a willingness to rebuild the family together. Even in the midst of public scrutiny, the Brown family began to discover a new kind of strength, one rooted not in control or appearances, but in vulnerability, accountability, and the shared desire to survive as a family. But shadows of the past were not easily dismissed. Old habits, lingering resentments, and the constant tension of media attention meant that the road ahead would be long, challenging, and unpredictable. Yet for the first time in a long while, the family felt the stirrings of hope. Hope that honesty paired with empathy could coexist. Hope that respect could triumph over humiliation. And hope that, perhaps, even Kody could learn what it truly meant to lead, not with ego, but with integrity. The Brown household had entered a new phase, one in which every action, every glance, every word carried double meaning. The cameras rolled incessantly, capturing family moments now laced with tension, subtle power struggles, and unspoken challenges. Kody, still wrestling with the aftermath of his public humiliation, found himself walking a precarious line between redemption and ego. Every conversation with the wives was a negotiation. every interaction with the children required patience he hadn't exercised in years. Robyn, meanwhile, embraced a role she had long deferred. Her voice, once subdued by habit and circumstance, now resonated with authority and clarity. She was no longer just Kody's wife. She was a guardian of the family's dignity, a voice of reason, and a force to be reckoned with. The public response intensified the pressure. Social media platforms buzzed with clips of Kody's blunt statements, commentary dissecting the family dynamics, and debates about polygamy and respect. Articles speculated on fractures in the household, fans chose sides, and critics questioned whether the family could survive the scrutiny. Kody felt it acutely. He was no longer just accountable to his wives and children, he was accountable to a world watching his every misstep. For the first time, his authority felt fragile. One afternoon, the wives gathered without Kody, a quiet meeting in the sunlit kitchen. "Things have changed," Meri said softly, "not just because of him, but because we've finally started holding each other accountable. And ourselves." Janelle nodded. "He's realizing he can't push boundaries the way he used to. But we have to be careful. One wrong move and the cameras will capture it, and the world will see everything fall apart." Christine added, "I've lived with this for years. But what Robyn did, she drew the line, and it reminded us all that we deserve respect." Robyn, sitting at the head of the table, nodded slowly. "We can't control Kody entirely, but we can control how we respond. We can insist on dignity, demand accountability, and protect ourselves and the children. That's our power now." Kody, sensing the growing alliance and the subtle resistance, knew he needed to act, or risk losing the trust he had taken for granted for so long. He called for a family meeting, this time with a different tone, one of humility and reflection. "I know I've hurt all of you," he began, his voice measured but sincere. "I've acted selfishly, and I realize now that words have consequences. I can't erase the past, but I want to work towards something better. I want to earn back your trust." Robyn studied him, skeptical but cautiously optimistic. "Actions, Kody. Words alone aren't enough. Respect is shown, not claimed." The other wives echoed her sentiment. Together they laid out boundaries, expectations, and non-negotiables. The children listened, learning lessons about honesty, accountability, and resilience. It was a fragile step forward, a delicate dance of trust, humility, and vigilance. But it marked a turning point. The family was no longer defined solely by Kody's decisions. They had begun to define themselves, individually and collectively, and the cameras could capture a story more authentic than ever before. Yet, even as progress unfolded, the shadow of past mistakes lingered. Old habits, lingering resentments, and external scrutiny threatened to undo the fragile peace. The family would need strength, patience, and courage to navigate the challenges ahead. And as night fell over the Brown household, the quiet hum of cameras reminded them their lives, their choices, and their truths were now both private battles and public spectacle. The stakes had never been higher. The Brown household felt different that evening. The hum of the cameras, usually a background noise, seemed amplified. Each click, each rolling shot, a reminder that the world was watching. But inside, the tension had evolved from confrontation to something heavier: anticipation, fear, and the weight of unspoken truths. Kody sat in the living room, his fingers drumming on the armrest of his chair. The bravado that had always shielded him was gone, replaced with something unfamiliar: introspection. He thought about the past weeks, the humiliation, the backlash, the confrontation with Robyn, and the quiet, simmering strength of the other wives. For the first time, he realized that control was an illusion. Respect, trust, and love could not be commanded. They had to be earned. Robyn entered the room, her presence commanding attention without force. "Kody?" she began, her voice calm but firm. "This is the moment where choices matter. You can continue to rely on excuses, or you can face the truth of what you've done and commit to change." Kody looked up, meeting her gaze. There was no deflection, no charm, just raw honesty in her eyes. I see it now," he admitted. "I've hurt you, all of you. I thought honesty was enough, but I've been selfish and blind. I don't want to lose this family. I don't want to lose you." Meri stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "Words are a start, Kody, but they aren't the end. Actions count. Consistency counts. You need to prove that this isn't just another moment that will pass." Janelle and Christine nodded in agreement, their expressions resolute. The alliance among the wives, once quiet and subtle, had solidified into a united front, firm, patient, and unyielding. Kody took a deep breath. "I understand. I will show you every day that I can do better. I will listen, I will respect, and I will put this family first." Robyn studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the history of disappointment, manipulation, and ego-driven decisions. Finally, she nodded. "Then let's start there. No more words, only actions." The children, observing quietly from the hallway, felt a shift. They saw a father who had once seemed invincible now humbled, and a mother who had found her voice not in defiance alone, but in courage and clarity. They learned in real time that families could fracture and rebuild, that mistakes could teach as much as victories, and that respect was not optional. It was essential. Outside, the cameras captured every moment, but the story unfolding was no longer a spectacle. It was real, raw, and fragile, a portrait of a family at a crossroads. The choices Kody made in the coming weeks would define not only his legacy, but the stability and future of the entire Brown family. And as the night settled over the household, one truth became undeniable. The path forward would be difficult, the stakes high, and the lessons profound. But for the first time in a long while, hope glimmered on the horizon. The days following the confrontation were quieter, but the quiet was deliberate. Not ignorance, not avoidance, but a careful recalibration. The Brown household had shifted. Each member was negotiating a new reality, where respect, accountability, and communication mattered more than habit or hierarchy. Robyn moved through the home with a quiet strength. She spoke openly with the children, encouraging honesty and emotional expression. They asked questions, sometimes awkward, sometimes sharp, and she answered with patience, teaching lessons in boundaries, dignity, and self-respect. Meri, Janelle, and Christine also found their voices strengthened. Private conversations became opportunities to align on family priorities, to support one another, and to assert boundaries that Kody had long ignored. The subtle alliances that had formed during the confrontation were now cementing, creating a network of mutual respect and accountability. Kody, meanwhile, was learning the hard way that leadership could not be claimed. It had to be earned. He began participating in household duties more intentionally, listening actively rather than dismissively, and seeking input from the wives and children. Each small act was a test. Would it be genuine or performative? Would it sustain trust or erode it further? One afternoon, Robyn approached him with a measured tone. "Kody, rebuilding trust isn't about gestures or words. It's about consistency. The family needs to see change every day, not just when it's convenient or on camera." He nodded, absorbing the gravity of her words. "I understand. I'll do it. I have to do it." The children noticed too. They saw the father who had once seemed untouchable now humbled, learning alongside them. They began to express themselves more openly, asserting boundaries and voicing opinions, confident that they would be heard. In the background, the cameras recorded everything. The network continued to broadcast the Brown family's life, but the story being captured was no longer one of spectacle alone. It was a story of growth, accountability, and resilience, the kind of story that unfolded in private spaces as much as in public ones. Meri spoke to Robyn one evening, the sun casting long shadows across the living room floor. "You've changed the tone of this household. I didn't realize how much we needed it until I saw it happen." Robyn smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and resolve. "We all needed it, and will continue to need it. Change isn't easy. It's messy, and it takes time. But it's worth it." Even Kody seemed to sense the truth of her words. The lesson was clear. Ego alone could no longer guide his actions. The family would only thrive if honesty, respect, and accountability were woven into every interaction. And so, the Brown family began the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding. Not a perfect family, not one without flaws or challenges, but one rooted in awareness, responsibility, and the fragile yet enduring power of respect.